Hello everybody, this is lesson 5.4. So this is adding and subtracting polynomials. So going back to unit 1, we talked about like terms. And so for example, like terms are 3x and negative 4x. They have to have the same variables on them. So we're expanding that definition. They have to have the same variables with the same exponents. So for example, like terms would be that, but if I change the exponent there to a 3, those would not be alike. They have to have the same variables to the same exponents. And also an example of unlike terms would be something like this. Okay, these are unlike because the variable pieces are not exactly the same. Okay, so when you're adding, you're just really combining like terms. So you look for things that are alike. So these are alike and we're adding here. So you add the coefficients in front and keep the variable piece the same. So negative 5x cubed and 4x cubed is negative 1x cubed. There is no x squared pieces in there other than that one, so that just comes down into your answer. Here's your plain x term. There's nothing to go with it, so that just comes down into your answer. And then the constants, negative 1, positive 2. So it's positive 1, and that's your final answer. You do not necessarily have to list your answer in descending order. You would only be required to do that if it told you. Okay, so this one, and we don't necessarily even need the parentheses on problems like these. So here you have an x cubed, nothing else with it, so that's going to come down into your answer. Here you have two x squared terms, 1x squared and negative 3x squared, so negative 2x squared. A plain x term here and there, negative 3x plus 7x, so 4x. Positive, and then 2 and negative 5 gives you minus 3. Again, you don't have to list it in descending order, but all the signs in the front have to be the same if you list it in a different order. I'm not going to show you how to check these using a calculator because it's kind of superfluous. And we won't do that one either, but let's look at this. So when you're subtracting, remember when we subtracted, when we were doing this, I always had you change the minus to a plus and the next thing to its opposite. So a problem that is equivalent is this. Okay, because subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. So we're going to look at that today. So the first thing we're looking at is just an opposite of the polynomial. So the important thing is that when you want the opposite of this thing, it's the opposite of every single term. So one way to denote that is this. Because remember, opposite means put a negative in front of it. The other option is that you could make every single term here the opposite. So it would look like this. These are equivalent expressions, okay? They mean exactly the same thing. So you could have minus and parentheses around the whole thing, or you could have every term the opposite sign. So you have to remember that when you are subtracting, because you will be adding the opposite. So now these are subtracting, so you have to keep in mind about like terms, but there is something that's really important here. So if you're doing this minus this, you don't need the parentheses around the first piece. you are going to first change every sign here to the opposite. That's how minus next to parentheses works. So when you're subtracting, you'll be adding the opposite. So you need to take the opposite of all of these. So this will become plus 2x cubed. That'll become minus x to the fourth. That'll become plus 4x cubed. And this becomes plus 3x squared. Oops, I see that this is to the fifth. So let me change that to the fifth power. Okay, notice from here to here, every term changed sign. That's how minus next to the parentheses works. Every single term needs to change sign. You're taking the opposite of every term there. This is really important because in algebra, parentheses are misused or mistreated frequently. Okay, so now you look and you look for your like terms. So I have two things that are to the fifth power. So 2x to the fifth and 9x to the fifth is 11x to the fifth. And you could maybe cross those out as you use them. There's only one something to the x fourth. It's just minus x to the fourth. Your cube terms, 1x cubed and 4x cubed, so 5x cubed. And you could maybe cross them out if you're having trouble keeping track of them. X squared terms, negative 2x squared and 3x squared is 1x squared. And then constant, you just have a 4 in there and that's it. And that's your final answer. But this is really important when you have minus next to parentheses. Everything after that has to become the opposite sign because subtracting is the same thing as adding the opposite. So here again, rewrite the first quantity. Everything here becomes the opposite because of the minus next to the parentheses. So that'll become minus 3x to the fifth plus 4x cubed and minus 5. Everything should become the opposite sign. So that became negative, this became positive, this became negative. That's how minus next to parentheses works. So now combine your like terms. You have two things that are to the fifth, 7x to the fifth and negative 3x to the fifth. It's 4x to the fifth. Notice the variable piece with the exponent does not change when you're adding and subtracting. You have something to the third, x to the third and 4x to the third, so that's 5x to the third, minus 9x, minus 5. That's your final answer. I'll come back with another video for the last page.